As you guys may know, podcasting is one of my favorite ways to start, grow, and monetize a business. We have an expert who specializes in monetizing not just podcasts, but other hobbies as well, and allows you to embrace that remote worker lifestyle. So if you are someone who likes to travel, but you feel stuck because of your work, this is going to be a really awesome session for you. So the expert who joins us, she hosts the Offbeat Life podcast, which teaches listeners how to become location independent. And she helps people make money on the road so they can travel the world. Our expert who joins us is none other than Debbie Arcangeles. Debbie, welcome to the summit.
Hey, Mark, thank you so much for having me here. I'm super excited to talk to you.
Debbie, I'm so happy to have you on Side Hustle Paradise. And I do feel like there are so many people who want to become location independent, want to be able to travel to all these different places and not feel like they are restrained to one spot because of work. So I'm wondering if you could share with us how you were able to achieve that for yourself and where the podcasting fits into the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Mark said, my name is Debbie and I do run a website and a podcast called The Offbeat Life. And honestly, my story didn't start out with me, really starting this business. It was just because I had a need and I thought that other people would have the same things as well. So I started the podcast because I was really unhappy with my 9 to 5. I used to be a photographer. I used to do traveling a lot and I would meet a lot of digital nomads. So I thought, why not interview them? And my fiance at that time, he introduced me to podcasting and I was like, this is the perfect platform for it, to really ask the experts how you can do it. And a year and a half after I started it, I was able to leave my 9 to 5 and do it full time.
And can you talk about how that transformation happened and just some of the key things that helps you monetize your podcast?
Absolutely. So when I started, I didn't even know you could monetize a podcast right away. I remember going to like Facebook groups and people would tell me it could take years, because you need to grow a huge listen base, a huge fan base. And I didn't think it was even possible, but it really happened organically where 6 months after I started the podcast, two brands simultaneously came to me and was like, how do we do this? How do we pay you to have our brand on your show and on your website? And that's where it all clicked. I was like, okay, this can really happen. And I was fortunate enough to be talking to a lot of entrepreneurs on the podcast. And I got so many amazing tips from them that I learned how to pitch to brands, how to negotiate. And that's really where it all started.
And that's the great thing about podcasting is there's just so many different ways to monetize. You can get clients from your show, you can get sponsors from your show, which is a common route that people utilize. And there's just so much revenue potential with something like podcasting. I do feel like a lot of people, myself included, I've always done podcasting in this setup, and I know that you have that, like your location independence. So I'm wondering how you've been able to do that with your podcast.
Absolutely. So the great thing about podcasting is you can record it remotely. You can record it anywhere and anytime. Even if you're doing an interview-based podcast, you can do that remotely as well. So it's not really a hard thing to do as long as you know what to do with your equipment and you have internet, and that's pretty much it.
And it's just a very simple breakdown. So resources like equipment and internet.
Yeah.
And I do feel like there are people who overcomplicate what they have to do. Like it's easy to listen to what Debbie just said there and be like, there's gotta be more than that. But it really just comes down to equipment and internet. You could have a fancy background. You could also be location independent and, bring one of your books with you or just find a nice setting and do the interviews there. So there's definitely a lot to it. And the key thing about being a remote worker is that you control your hours. So how do you do the work and still have that, tourist mentality? Because a lot of people, they become like the attraction is to go to different places around the world. So how do we not get distracted by that, still feel like we're touring and get our work done?
It's really up to the person how they can become more motivated and productive. But for me, it's all about scheduling and realizing that even if you are working remotely, if you are a digital nomad, there has to still be work getting done. And if you're not doing that, it's nothing is going to get done. So what I usually do is I have routines for myself. I have a morning routine, and then I schedule a time for myself, a start time and an end time. And I know it's really hard to end sometimes because, especially if you're an entrepreneur, you're constantly working. But it is really important to set that time. So, first of all, you're not going to get burned out. Second of all, you need to make sure that you're getting work done. And that's really, it takes some time to get used to that groove because in the beginning it can get really distracting, especially when you're traveling and you want to see new things. That's why for me, I don't think that fast traveling is necessarily a good idea if you want to work remotely. It's all about pacing yourself or having a solid base in order to do it, and then traveling maybe during the weekends when you're there. But I don't recommend being a digital nomad and like being in a new country or in a new city every week or even every other week, because it really distracts you from your work. So there, just because you're location independent doesn't mean you're like traveling all the time. It just means that you can do it anywhere. So if you want to live in India for like 2 months, you can do that. If you want to live in Taiwan or somewhere in Europe, like you can do all of that and still bring your work with you. But you can't be irresponsible as well.
And that's where you have that healthy mix where if you only, like when I go on a 1 week vacation, I fully immerse myself in that vacation because you just have 7 days. But if you keep doing that to yourself because you are location independent, then you feel like you have to keep immersing yourself in the area, keep having that tourist mentality, and forget about the work that is allowing you to have that lifestyle in the first place. So maintaining that balance is going to be different for each person, but I feel like 7 days isn't enough to both see the place where you are and also do the work that you have to do.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's really important if you are working remotely, if you can do this remotely, is to stay at a place for a longer period of time so that you can immerse yourself in the culture and also still be able to do the work. So I would recommend, if you can and you want to do it, to stay at a place for at least a month or longer, because it does take up a lot of your time to be able to adjust to the place, to make sure that you're getting work done, you have your workflow going, and you're also seeing enough of the city that you're in.
I mean, a month is definitely a really good time frame. And I mean, just going back to, the way you get there is by making enough money to pay expenses and you're able to grow. And I know you started like the podcasting was your main introduction to being able to embrace this lifestyle. How have you been able to grow since the initial podcast launch?
Yeah, absolutely. So since then, I mean, the first 3 months of launching, I was featured in major medias online like Refinery 29, Forbes, and all of that stuff. So it's really gotten me to a point where I'm recognized in this specific niche. So, and then after that, the business really started with a podcast, and then I have now a website, and then obviously like my social media. So all of those things have become a package. And now it's grown into another website where I show people how they can also start a podcast and do this remotely and make this into an actual lifestyle and not just a hobby. Because I often see a lot of podcasters that have like a ton of downloads and they just don't know how to monetize it, or people who really want to get into this and they're super confused about how to do it. So it has taken me to a similar avenue. It's still an avenue that I'm still doing, but now I get to help people do something that they also love.
And it's interesting how you mentioned you got a lot of this exposure at the beginning. You mentioned Refinery 29, you mentioned Forbes. Was this planned? Like, did you have a strategy for getting this, or did this just happen because of great content?
When I had my first feature, which was Refinery 29, there was no strategy at all. Like in the beginning, there was no strategy. I honestly did not know what I was doing. And then after a while, I realized, well, this is really helping out my image. People are finding me through these articles. And I started interviewing other writers, and they would give me tips on how to be featured in more articles. And they also started featuring me with some of like the listicles that they had. So it's become, it wasn't strategic in the beginning. Now it is, because I know what I'm doing. And I learned from all of that in order to get to this point. So it was kind of all wishy, like I had no idea what I was doing. So yeah, none at all.
And it's interesting because, again, with a podcast, when you interview guests, you could choose which guests you bring on very strategically. So my approach is to get clients. I know I interview authors, and authors usually they want to learn how to start a podcast that expands their book, and that's where the connection happens. And similarly, I mean, you could just interview if you want to get on more podcasts, interview podcast hosts. If you want to get on major media outlets, interview the people who are contributors for those major media outlets, and it just keeps building from there. And that's what I love about a podcast. It is just such easy access to so many great relationships.
Yeah, I definitely believe in that. There's so many potential to it. And it's really creating a community for yourself that you would never have had if you were just not having it at all. And I think it's really popular now. People really love podcasting. They want to start it. They want to be in it. It's a great way for exposure for that person as well. So I always find that with podcasting, if you're interviewing them and if they're doing something for you, it's a win-win for everybody. So it's not, you know, it doesn't hurt to ask them if they could do a content swap or things like that.
And again, just think about how you can use those relationships. Who are the types of people you want to get in touch with, and use podcasting to make that happen. Debbie, I know she's got some program and tutorials around the podcasting sphere. So where can we go to find more of your work and what you're doing?
Absolutely. So if you want to learn more about how to become a digital nomad, how to do remote work, find jobs in that, you can go to theoffbeatlife.com. If you want to learn how to create a podcast, you can go to howtocreateapodcast.com. And I'll
Great
have,
domain.
I know everybody was saying that too, and I'm very big on SEO, so I was like, this is a great name. So you could go to howtocreateapodcast.com, and I have a ton of resources there for you, and also some products that you can take a look at as well. And I just wrote an ebook called How to Create a Profitable Podcast, where it pretty much has all of my secrets and what I learned. A lot of the mistakes that I made, I'm hoping people won't do that. So I share all of my secrets in that book as well.
Well, Debbie, thank you for sharing those resources with us. Again, that is such a great domain name. If you find something like that, pounce on it. But thank you so much for coming on Side Hustle Paradise. It was a pleasure having you here today.
Thank you so much, Marc, for having me. It was such a pleasure to speak with you.